tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. In my weekly live streams, I've been doing a series on Abhidhamma that I'm winding up now, coming to an end. Last week I did the understanding of time in the Abhidhamma. And I limited my remarks there to just the Abhidhamma, but that brought up some other reflections about the nature of time a little more broadly, so I thought I'd do it again today and include but not limit myself to the Abhidhamma. In the Pali, there are 5 words that can be translated as time, all a little bit different in their connotations. There's kala, which is maybe the most general, and we see that in the compound akaliko, timeless, which is one of the attributes of the Dhamma, not associated with time, or time is not relevant to the Dhamma. And that's a term, akaliko, that can be interpreted in more than one way. On one level, it means that the teaching is timeless in the sense that it was valid for the Buddha's time and it's valid for the present time. It's not specific to a particular set of historical circumstances. It's a timeless teaching. But a deeper meaning is that the highest dhammas are outside of the realm of time. Nibbana is beyond time altogether, or outside of time. So another word is kana, which is mostly used in the Abhidhamma, and it means a moment, the shortest possible unit of time, a single moment of time. And there was, in the early period of Buddhism, there were debates between different schools of Buddhism as to some of the technicalities. And one of them was the duration of a kanha. In some schools, the kanha was thought to be an infinitesimal, meaning it had no duration. This was held by the Sarvastivada, for example, and they also held that a material Dhamma in space, this kalapa, which is the spatial equivalent of the kanha, like an atom, had no extension, just a location, so a point. So the occurrence of a Dhamma is like a point instant. But the Theravada held that the kanha actually has a very brief duration. It actually exists for a very tiny fragment of time. And this is actually one of the cases where, although arriving at it by an entirely different route, the Theravada ends up agreeing with modern science, because physics postulates that time is divided into discrete quantum moments called a Planck instant. That there can't be further subdivided, but it has a certain very brief duration. So you have kala, kanha, adan means a extension or length of time, and it's used to refer to, for example, a lifespan, or the whole beginningless and endless stretch of samsara is called samsara adan. And the nibbana is said to be free of adan, or outside or without adan. So adan is an extension or a length of time. Santati fourth word is a series of moments, a sequence. And this is on the subjective level. A kanha, a moment, we can never really access with the mind, but a series of kanhas that we can experience as a subjective or experiential present moment is actually a series or a sequence, is a santati. The fifth one is the most commonly used, is Samaya, which in its technical meaning it means a convergence of causes or a convergence of events. And this touches on the Abhidhamma definition of time. Time is conceived of as being not essentially real. It's only a mental convention that is used to separate events in time. So we have our conventional time that we measure by the clock and the calendar is actually measuring astronomical events. A day is one rotation of the Earth. A year is one revolution of the Earth around the sun. And it's these events that have some ontological reality, but not time. Time is used just as a convention. So, according to Abhidhamma, no event occurs or no Dhamma arises except through the influence of multiple causes. Nothing arises without a cause, and nothing arises from a single cause. So when you have this confluence of events come together, then there is an event. And we call that Samaya. The book I've been following for these Abhidhamma teachings, Kalupahana's Theravada Abhidhamma, makes an interesting point about Samaya and quotes the commentaries that Samaya is used, and this is a point that would really only interest Pali grammar nerds, but it's used in three different cases in the three different Pitakas, the three collections of the scriptures, Suttas, Vinaya, Abhidhamma, at the beginning of a passage. In the suttas, most of the Sutta Pitaka the suttas begin with Ewang me sutang, thus have I heard, because they were recited by Ananda at the first council, and he was repeating what he had heard the Buddha say. So he starts each sutta with thus have I heard. But there's one small book in the Khuddaka Nikaya that's not attributed to Ananda, but to a laywoman who memorized the Buddhist teachings the months he was teaching at Kosambi. This is the Iti Uttaka. And they start differently. They start with Ekang Samayang, which means at that time. And it's in the accusative case, which the commentary says means that it's deliberately indefinite. It's like at one time I heard this from the Buddha, but without saying on Thursday the 19th of March. Ekang Samayang in the accusative case. And then in the Vinaya, passages for the exposition of the rules begin with Tena Samayena, which is in the instrumental case. And this alludes directly to Samaya's technical meaning of a convergence of factors. It's saying because these various events occurred at this time, the Buddha laid down this rule. So by means of which is the instrumental. Tena Samayena. And in the Abhidhamma, passages begin with tasming samaye, which is locative case, which points to a location in time or space, so it's more precise, and it alludes to the nature of time as a container or a metaphorical location. So time is seen as essentially unreal, or as convention, just as space is also seen the same way, as only a convention of the mind to allude to the separation between solid objects. So time is a convention to allude to the separation between events, by which we order events. There were other schools of Buddhism that held that space and time were essentially real and acted as containers for the events within them. The Sarvastivada school had an interesting theory of time and consciousness. The name of their school, Sarvastivada, is Sanskrit, means everything exists or all exists, meaning past, present, and future all exist. So whereas the Theravada held that the present moment Dhamma is the only thing that's real, the Sarvastivada held that past and future were also real, and the Dhammas exist as potentials in the future, and consciousness exists in the present moment. And the Dhammas, potential Dhammas in the future, essentially what they do is move backwards through time. They cross the threshold of the citta and then are become known to the citta for an instant and then fall away into the past. So the citta is stationary in the present moment. So the present moment here is seen as a kind of eternal present. There's a teaching in Tibetan Buddhism of the yoga of the three times. It's a way of contemplating time, that the future is unreal because it is not yet manifest. The past is unreal because it has already ceased to be. And the present is unreal because it cannot be fixed. On a subjective level, which is really what the original teachings of the Buddha are always interested in, the individual and salvation, not in metaphysical theorizing. On that subjective individual level, the present moment is really all we have. Even when we have memories, they're experienced in the present moment. The present moment is all we ever really have. And even that is in a way illusory because, as the Tibetan teaching alludes, it cannot be fixed. We cannot pin it down. The metaphysically real moment is the kanha, is too instantaneous, is too brief to possibly hold with the mind. So what we experience is the santati, the series. So our present moment experience is kind of sloppy. We have a sequence of moments that we call the present. And the act of perception itself, according to Abhidhamma, takes 17 mind moments. And even those 17 taken together, one would have to be very advanced indeed to be able to get the awareness of that keen to be aware of a single moment of perception. But it's a kind of a goal to to be worked towards, even if it's never reached, is to try and make the perception or the awareness keen and quick. When we do meditation, particularly vipassana kinds of meditation, we're trying to be aware of very brief moments of time. And there's kind of a paradox going on, because in one sense we're slowing down when we meditate. Certainly we try and slow down the body. We try not to move or fidget. We try and keep still. And the bodily processes like the heartbeat and the breathing naturally slow as the meditation deepens. And we try and slow down the activity of the mind, so we're not jumping around and thinking and daydreaming and getting lost. So we're slowing all the objective side of reality down, but the knowing, the citta, we're trying to make as quick as possible, and to be very keenly aware of very brief intervals of time. This is an aspect of that precision of noticing that's called tatra majjhatthata. That being in the middle about that, or is the literal translation. The more understandable translation maybe is specific neutrality. It's the kind of equanimity that's required for proper insight practice. And it's specific because of tatra, that. And that requires that quickness of mind. So it's something to be striven for in the meditation, is a precision and quickness of noticing. This can lead us to penetration of the nature of reality, particularly the aspect of anicca, or impermanence, which at its deepest level is seeing the evanescent nature of reality, that nothing persists, even for a moment. Things are ceasing as soon as they arise. And any sense of stability or continuity is an illusion. And when we're not attending to the present moment, whenever we're not doing that, that's when we create a self. If you think about it, a self construction doesn't exist in the present moment. Who are you without any context? When we create a self, we do it either in reference to the past. Someone asks you, who are you? You say your name and maybe where you work, where you live. These are things related to the past. This is my history, this is where I come from, this is who I am. Or you create a self related to the future, based on your hopes and your fears and anxieties and plans, and all future oriented. Where am I going? But the present moment is absolutely without context. It's just as it is. So there's no room for this self-construction. The spiritual quality of sati, one of the path factors, samasati, and also one of the enlightenment factors, one of the faculties, has usually been translated mindfulness, and sometimes that's understood as being in the present moment, and there's an aspect of truth to that, but it's a little simplistic, because the word sati actually comes from the idea of memory. And the best understanding of sati is remembering to be present. So you're conscious of being conscious. You're you're awake to your wakefulness. But that is only done in the present moment. When the mind slips off into running over old film strips of the past, memories, or jumping forward into speculations and wonderings about the future, then sati is not present because the mind is not remembering to be conscious, not recollecting the present moment. So one way sati ties into memory is that when you are fully conscious, when your sati is strong, when you do something, it will be registered. So it is stored in memory. It reaches the stage of tadaramana, or registration, which only happens when something is done consciously. So there's a very traditional way that teachers would test the mindfulness of their students. They would ask them a question, like when the student comes to see them, the master would ask, which side of the door did you leave your shoes on? And if he can't remember, he put them down on the right or the left-hand side. That means he wasn't mindful at the time he took them off. So moving on to another area, nature of time, something that goes beyond the Abhidhamma, I would like to at least touch on the broader picture of cosmological time as understood in the Buddhist system. And this touches on very long periods of time. To begin with, the Buddha always refused to answer questions about the origin of the world, saying it's essentially unknowable, abhyakata. It's not a sensible question to ask. But the later tradition, quite logically from first principles, always held that samsara is without beginning. This became quite well established, that there is no origin. The reason it can't be answered is because you can't find it, because however far back you go into the past to moment X, there's always a moment X minus 1. You can never find a first moment, which is perfectly logical within the system of dependent origination. Nothing arises without a cause, so there couldn't have been an initial uncaused cause. Every cause had to have a preceding cause. So samsaric time is seen as being endless in both directions. Nibbana is seen as outside of time. It's nothing to do with that. So time is something that happens only in the realm of the conditioned. And although samsara, or the cosmos as a whole, is beginningless and endless, there's no subsystem within that which is without a beginning and an end. This is anicca, impermanence. So this world system that we live in had a beginning at some point in time and will have an ending at some point in the future. And this duration from beginning to end of a world system is called a kappa, or a mahakappa. And the Buddha said that it's not possible to reckon the length of a kappa is so many years, or so many thousands of years, or so many hundreds of thousands of years. And he gave an analogy. He said, if there was a block of solid granite, a yojana on a side, and a sparrow flew past every 100 years and brushed it lightly with its tail feathers, that block of granite would be worn down by the feathers before the end of the kappa. So long indeed is a kappa. You know? So it's a very long but finite period of time. And within a kappa, there is a subdivision called an antara kappa. There is said to be 20 antara kappas to make up a kappa. And these refer mostly to the experience of human beings. And it's cyclical, that there's an age of rising and improvement in morality, in lifespan, and so forth, up to 80,000 years. Beings, meaning, beings have a lifespan of 80,000 years. And then they decline in morality and in lifespan, in strength and in beauty, in wisdom, until they reach the bottom of a lifespan of 10 years. And within this system, we're set at the present moment, we're well gone down on the downslope, on a declining age. This is said to be a declining age. And there'll come a time when the Buddha's teachings are completely forgotten. So we're still, although we're on the decline, we're still within a Buddha age. There's still a remembrance of a Buddha's teaching. And it's only when a Buddhist teaching has been completely forgotten by the world that there's a possibility of a new Buddha arising. Because a Buddha is one who is Buddha Sambuddha, is one who is fully enlightened by himself. So he doesn't have a previous Buddhist teaching to guide him. He makes this heroic discovery all on his own. So these very long cycles of time, these were elaborated mostly in the commentaries, but when the Buddha referred to them, it was always to make the point about impermanence. All of the Buddha's teachings always had this practical application. It's always important to remember that he wasn't interested or didn't teach metaphysics or theories. He taught practical ways to make an end of suffering. And he only touched on these other topics when they were useful to that end. So he taught about the stages leading to the end of the world system in order to highlight impermanence. And this is explicit in the sutta where he talks about it. He says, you think, O monks, that the great ocean and the mountains are permanent, but they too shall be reduced to ash and dust. And then he tells the story of how the world comes to an end. But mostly when he talked about impermanence, he emphasized the momentary nature of it. There's a sutta where he's asked the monks how they understood impermanence. And one monk said, every morning when I get up, I remember this might be my last day to live, so I better make the most of it. And the Buddha said, no, you're way off the mark. And then another monk said, every time I sit down to meditate, I think this may be my last chance to meditate, so I better make the most of it. The Buddha said, that's better, but it's still, you're not there yet. And the third monk says, when I take an in-breath, I think I may not live to breathe out again. When I breathe out, I think I may not live to breathe in again. And the Buddha said, no, you've got it, that's it. So just emphasizing that very brief reality of impermanence. And it even goes, cuts deeper than that even, because a single breath is composed of many, many mind moments. And in each moment, everything is ceasing. Everything's arising and ceasing in a flash. Another aspect of this cosmological time, a very big time picture, highlights a key difference between the Indian and Western way of thinking. And this is not specific only to Buddhism, but a general Indian cultural thing, is the perception of time as cyclical. Whereas in the West, not only, but particularly strongly after the introduction of Christianity, although you can find it predates that, there's a sense of time as linear, that there is a definite beginning and an evolution, or usually in the earlier systems it's a devolution, a downward grading, like in the Greeks, from the Golden Age to the Silver Age, the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, is a constant falling away from an initial state of perfection. But there's at least a trajectory, and there's a definite beginning and a definite ending. This is not so in the Indian view. Time is a cycle, and there's cycles within cycles. As we talked about this, within a kappa, there's 20 antara kappas, and each one of those is a kind of up and down cycle, and they repeat 20 times, and then the whole thing falls apart. And then there's even bigger cycles. There's a 64 kappa cycle of different phases of world system destruction by fire, water, and air. So there's cycles within cycles, but there's no directional, linear, either progression or regression. There's just constantly cycling up and down. So one of the ways this played out culturally is that in the West, history mattered. They paid attention to history and chronology. It's one of the things that bedevils modern research and academic examination of ancient India, is dating things, because the Indians never bothered with that. Although they were quite advanced, more advanced than the West in many respects in terms of mathematics particularly, and there were no slouches in astronomy. They had no interest in maintaining chronologies for a long time. The first unambiguous, clear date we have for anything that happened in India is Alexander's invasion, and we have that from the Greek side. And particularly in Buddhism, samsara is seen as essentially purposeless. It's a futile endeavor. It's round and round. This is the meaning of samsara, the word. It means to circle round and round. And there's this sense of the futility and aimlessness of it. That all our strivings and projects and desires and hopes and dreams, they all come to naught. We're endlessly cycled back in and out of birth and death. And nothing within the condition really matters or has a fundamental significance. And the Buddha would point to this, and with also this aspect of the vastness of time, with such analogies as all the skulls you left behind in your previous births could be piled up. They would make a pile bigger than the Himalaya mountains. Then he would say, "How long, monks, have you been filling the cemeteries? Enough, enough." So just to summarize the key points and wrap it up, we look at time in the Buddhist conception, beginning with the Abhidhamma. Time is essentially unreal. There is also different degrees or scales of time that are alluded to or of importance in different contexts and different places, beginning at one end with the kanha, the very briefest moment, and at the far end, the kappas and mahakappas, and multiple mahakappas, the world ages. The Indian mind was always attracted to the very small and the very large. And then we have the practical time of the present moment and the attempt to be present here in the present moment. And this kind of elusive vanishing goal of realizing that, which is the practical application of the teaching.
Andalayam damakataya satukaram dadamase sadu sadu sadu